Welcome back to another VATSIM 101 video, everybody, where we're going to be talking about IFR flight planning with Simbrief. Before we move any further in the video, I do want to let you know that Simbrief is not the only flight planning tool that is out there. There are a ton of different flight planners that you can use either for free or ones that you pay for. I use Simbrief because it works in conjunction with another software called Navigraph, which is a paid subscription service if you do decide to use it, but it's going to give you all of the charts for every airport around the world, and it's going to make all the most up-to-date navigation data available for Simbrief and for your simulator. So when it comes to flight planning, it makes things a lot easier for you. This is not a sponsored video by Navigraph. I just love to promote the services that they provide because in my opinion, it is the best one that is out there. Simbrief is a free flight planning tool, but just keep in mind, if you do not link it with a Navigraph subscription, the information that it is going to provide you is not going to be up to date. But if you're prepared to deal with it and you know how to work around it, it is not that complicated to figure out. Now, I do recommend that whether you're using the paid version of Simbrief or not, that you make an account with them so that way some of your profile information gets saved. Now, when it comes to VATSIM, anytime that you are flying an IFR flight, you need to have a flight plan filed regardless of if there is ATC online or not. This is so that if any controllers do sign on, they will be able to see exactly what it is that you are doing. It is part of the code of conduct. Anytime you're flying IFR on the VATSIM network, you need to be on a flight plan. And we're going to break it all down in this video for you today. So to get started with your flight plan, at the very top of the screen, you're going to see a dispatch tab. We're going to click on that. And then on the next page, at the very center of the screen, you can kind of see it behind me here. It says create new flight. And then here is where we are going to fill out all the information about our flight, and then Simbrief is going to put together a flight plan for us. So we'll just get started at the very top and work our way down. So let's say today we're going to be flying as FedEx. In the flight information for the airline, we're going to use FDX, which is the ICAO code for FedEx, and then flight number, let's use our usual flight number, 43. Just to make it easy, nothing ever changes around here. For the departure field, we are going to pick Memphis. We'll just use FedEx's hub. So for today, let's go to Bogota, Colombia. So that's going to be SKBO. Really fun airport to fly to, by the way. Now, next to the arrival, we see alternate, and it's set to auto. This means that Simbrief is automatically going to plan an alternate airport for us. I always recommend that you plan for an alternate airport of some kind, just in case you get to your destination and for some reason you can't land there. Whether it's because the weather's really bad and it's not safe for us to land, or if maybe there's a lot of people that are trying to fly in there at the same time and we have to start flying holding patterns around the airport, we run a little bit low on fuel. By planning for an alternate airport, we are putting a place in the back of our minds that we can divert to without having to think about it, and we're going to make sure that we plan to have enough fuel on the plane to get us there just in case we have to. It's not required to file for an alternate airport in all cases, but it doesn't hurt anybody if you have an alternate airport planned. It's really only going to help you in case things start to go wrong, so leave it at auto. Simbrief will plan it for you. For the departure time, we can see that it's already set to October 26th at 19:15 Zulu. Everything in aviation is in Zulu time. If you don't know what Zulu time is, it is a coordinated time zone that we use for everybody around the world. Rather than trying to adjust for the 24 different time zones that are out there, everybody gets coordinated to one, so it makes it easy for everybody, regardless of where you are in the world. Now, on the lower left-hand side of Simbrief, we can see that the current Zulu time, October 26th, 1844 Zulu. It says UTC. UTC is Universal Time Coordinated, which is the same thing as Zulu. It's just a different way of saying it. But it makes it easy because now we don't have to do any sort of weird time conversions or try to figure out what Zulu time is. It's right there on Simbrief for us. Or if you're a nerd like me, you have a separate clock on your desk that says Zulu time. I don't have a problem, I promise. Next, we have the type of aircraft that we are going to be using. Now, for some reason, the window capture doesn't capture the drop down here, but today we're going to be flying the MD-11 freighter. So we're going to scroll down this really long list of airplanes that are here, and we're going to look for MD-1F, which is the MD-11 freighter. Now, to the right of it, we have the variant or airframe. So on top of making sure that you pick the right aircraft, make sure that you're using the correct airframe as well. So at the time that this video was recorded, the only option that we have for the MD-11 freighter is the MD-11F with the General Electric engines. There's a couple of other options for the Pratt & Whitney engines and then for the MD-11 extended range freighter, but we don't have those options available to us just yet. We're going to pick the TFDI with the GE engines. Next, we have the climb, cruise, and descent profiles. To explain what these are, The climb and the descent profiles are going to be the different indicated airspeeds that Simbrief is going to plan for your climb and your descent. Now, what Simbrief is going to give you is not always what the plane is going to fly. The plane is going to calculate all of that information based on the weight and weather conditions and things of that nature, but this is what Simbrief is estimating for. So for the climb profile, we're going to climb at 250 knots until we get to 10,000 feet, because that's a speed limit. Can't fly faster than 250 knots below 10,000. When we get above 10,000, we're going to accelerate to 330 knots, and then we're going to maintain 330 knots until we intercept Mach 0.82, and then we're going to fly Mach 0.82 for the rest of the climb. Now, what I mean by maintaining 330 knots until we intercept Mach 0.82, as we start to climb to higher altitudes, our Mach number is going to increase while we're at that 330 knot speed. At some point during that climb, 330 knots and Mach 0.82 are going to be the same airspeed. When that happens, we transition over from indicated airspeed to our Mach number. And as we start to climb higher at that Mach number, our indicated airspeed is going to decrease. There's a whole science behind why that is, and I'm not going to get too far into it with this video, but for the MD-11, it's going to transition us automatically, so we're not really going to have to worry about at what point we need to do it, but that is what I mean by 330 knots until we intercept Mach 0.82. The descent profile is simply our climb profile in reverse. For the cruise profile, there's two different ways that we can calculate it. One, if we click this drop down right here that you're not going to be able to see, there are a couple of different cruising Mach speeds that we can plan for. So that's going to vary depending on what plane you're flying, or you can use a cost index. A very oversimplified way of explaining what a cost index is, it's a formula that's going to determine how efficient your engines are going to be throughout the course of your flight. Different operators in the real world will have different cost indexes depending on different conditions, route of the flight, what the weather is. Some operators even have cost indexes that you're going to use for your climb, and then when you get to your cruise, you're going to switch it to a different one. On most of the flights that I do, I leave this at auto and let Simbrief decide what it's going to be. It's a simulator. It's not real money. It's not real fuel. Who cares how much of it we burn? I leave it at auto and let Simbrief decide what it's going to be. Now, planes that are going to use cost indexes, for the most part, are planes that have auto throttle systems, so planes like the MD-11 or like all of your Airbuses or the Boeing 737. Planes that are not going to use cost indexes are pretty much anything that doesn't have an auto throttle. Planes like the CRJs, you have your ATR, there's all of your general aviation stuff, some of your corporate jets aren't going to use one, so just use whatever's appropriate for your particular plane. Next to the descent profile, you're going to see fuel factor, and if we click this question mark, it's going to tell us exactly what this means. So it says, use this option to increase or decrease the amount of fuel Simbrief calculates. For example, if you routinely burn 5% more fuel than what Simbrief plans with this aircraft, try using a fuel factor of P05. So if you're flying your plane and you're noticing, again, that your plane is either burning more or less fuel, you can adjust the fuel factor to make it more accurate. I can tell you, I have yet to fly a plane where the fuel calculations are so inaccurate that I have to use a fuel factor. So I leave it at whatever the profile calls for, and pretty much every flight that I do, it's pretty accurate. If anything, it's off by maybe a couple of 100 pounds, which is not that big of a deal. Our ATC call sign is FedEx 43. If you were using a tail number, the ATC call sign is where you would put that. Again, if you were not using an airline call sign, you could put your plane's registration or the tail number in there. I'm just going to leave that at TFDI MD-11 because it's not going to hurt anything. FIN number, more of a real world thing. That is the actual number of the airframe that you're using. Doesn't really matter for a simulator. CellCal code is what you're going to use when you're flying across the ocean or in areas where there's no radar coverage. So not going to get too far into what the CellCal really is or how it works, but if you're flying over the ocean or if you're flying over really remote areas of the world, more than likely you're going to be using a CellCal. Just helps air traffic control keep in contact with you when you're outside of radar coverage. Next, we'll scroll down to the selections menu. So OFP layout, I have that set to Lido. That's just how the flight plan is going to be formatted once it is compiled. If you wanted to be a little bit more immersive, you can hit the drop down and it will show you the different airlines that you can have it formatted for, and it will show the flight plan based on how that company formats it. I've been using Lido for the past 3 or 4 years, which is more of like a Lufthansa type of format. So whatever you're most comfortable with reading is what I tell people to set that to. So that's entirely up to you. The AIRAC cycle is going to be the navigation data that Simbrief uses to plan the flight. So this one is 2410, which is valid between October 3rd and October 30th of 2024. Today is October 26th, 2024. So our day falls within this date range. This is going to be the accurate information for us. And like I had mentioned earlier in the video, know, if you are not subscribed to Navigraph, this is likely going to be a different air cycle. Just make sure that you are planning and adjusting accordingly based on whatever navigation set you're using. Down below, we have our units. We can either select pounds or kilograms. I'm an American. We don't believe in the metric system over here. My conspiracy is that England just made that up to spite us, but hey, what do I know? Flight maps is a couple of different options. We either have detailed, route only, simple, or none. I leave it at detailed so it shows everything for us. Taxi out and taxi in times, that is for fuel planning purposes only. That does not mean it's going to take us 30 minutes to taxi out and 10 minutes to taxi in. That's just what we're planning for in case we get a little bit delayed. How you want to set that is entirely up to you. I, for the most part, leave it at 30 and 10. That's more than enough fuel for 99% of the flights that I do. Flight rules are IFR, so we're flying IFR. I'm going to leave that alone. Type of flight, we either have scheduled, non-scheduled, general aviation, military, or training. I leave that at scheduled. I don't mess with that too much. And by too much, I mean like not at all. And then alternate counts is set to 1. That means that Simbrief is going to calculate for 1 alternate airport for us. So again, I don't change that at all. I leave it at 1. It's just what Simbrief defaults it to. On the right-hand side, we have detailed nav log. I'll leave that as on. ETOPS planning, we don't have to worry about for this particular flight, especially being that the MD-11 is a tri-jet or has 3 engines. So ETOPS is extended twin operations. So if you're flying a 2-engine aircraft across a large body of water or a remote area of the world where there's not a whole lot of airports that you could divert to, that is when you would turn that on. Different planes have different ETOPS certifications. I believe there's 3 of them. It's ETOPS 60, ETOPS 90, and ETOPS 120. I don't think there's anything above 120. So what that means is that there has to be an alternate airport within that amount of time of your position. So if you select ETOPS, we'll just turn it on for right now. Simbrief is not going to plan anything, but we'll just turn it on anyway. So Simbrief will adjust your route to always make sure that you are within, say you're an ETOPS 90 plane, Simbrief is going to plan your route so that there is always a suitable alternate within 90 minutes of your position. Plan step climbs, I'm also going to turn this on. So this is going to plan for us to climb higher at some point during our flight. As we fly longer, we're going to burn off more fuel. Then we can fly a little bit higher to be a little bit more fuel efficient. So we will have an initial altitude that we'll climb to, and then at some point along the route, we're going to climb to a higher altitude. Runway analysis, this means that Simbrief is going to recommend runways for us to use, and we're going to talk about that here in just a couple of minutes. Include NOTAMs and FIR NOTAMs. So NOTAMs are notice to air missions. Those are reports that are put out by the FAA when there is something not standard happening either at an airport or within an airspace. We all check our NOTAMs, all right? So in our flight plan itself, it will list all of those NOTAMs that are going to apply to this flight. Next, we have our optional entries. So scheduled block time is 5 hours. Block time includes the amount of time you're going to be in the air, plus your taxi out and taxi in times. Departure runway is going to be 36 left, and arrival runway is going to be 14 right. Now, these are just recommendations that Simbrief is giving us for this particular flight. The runways are always subject to change based on the needs of air traffic control or whatever the weather is at the airport. So don't think because Simbrief is recommending these runways means that you have to use them. If ATC does decide to change the runways on you, or if the weather changes and you have to use a different runway, that's perfectly okay. If the runways do change, we can figure it out. It's not that big of a deal. Altitude, passengers, freight, payload, and 0 fuel weight. We'll leave all those at auto with the exception of passengers, because if we have passengers on the MD-11 freighter, the EFB kind of gives us an error. So I always just set that to 0 whenever I'm flying the MD-11. But everything else, we can leave it auto. Simbrief is going to calculate all of those weights for us. Next drop down here, we have fuel planning. So I leave this. This is what Simbrief pretty much defaults it to. I don't stray from this too much. So contingency fuel, I have that set to auto, which is going to plan for 15 minutes worth. Contingency fuel is in the event you get to your destination and you can't land the first time, you have to go around and try the approach again. Just adds a little bit of extra fuel for that. Reserve fuel, I set that to FAA auto. Again, I don't stray from that too much. This is just what Simbrief defaults it to. I've never had a problem with these calculations, but how you want to do any of this is entirely up to you. Text entries, that is where it's going to have your Simbrief ID number, your name, and if you wanted to add any other text entries in there, you could do that. I don't ever do that, so I'm just going to leave that alone. And then down here, we have our route of flight. So I know it looks like it's a lot. So what I'll do is I will read through it first, and then I'm going to go back and then break it down piece by piece. Upon departure, we're going to fly the BB King 7 departure through the Kermy transition. Then we're going to fly to Vulcan. Then we're going to get on Quebec 116 to, what is that, JMAC? Then Yankee 280 to Canvey, Yankee 297 to Ursus, Uniform Papa 406 to Akbek, Uniform Quebec 121 to Isve, and then we're going to join the Isve 4 Echo arrival into Bogota. Let's break all of this down. First, we see BB King 7 and Kermi. Kermi is going to be a fix. Fixes are arbitrary points that exist in the sky at a given set of coordinates that you are going to fly to. Rather than putting that full set of coordinates into our GPS, we're just going to put the name of that set of coordinates, and then it's going to populate on our GPS for us. Right before Kermi, we see BB King 7. I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but we see BB King 7. So it's a fix identifier with a number at the end of it. When you see that at the beginning of your flight plan, that is going to be your SID or standard instrument departure. This is how they're going to be formatted on your flight plan. The first fix that comes after your departure is going to be the transition. So we fly the BB King 7 departure until we get to the Kermi fix. Then we transition off the departure onto our flight plan route. From Kermi, we're going to fly to Vulcan, which is going to be another fix. At Vulcan, we're going to get on Quebec 116 and fly it out to JMAC. Q116 is going to be an airway. Airways are 1 to 3 letters followed by 1 up to 3 numbers. We have Q116, Y280, Y297, UP406. Those are all going to be airways. Airways are made up of multiple fixes that you are going to track for however long it is that you're on that airway. But rather than putting every single one of those fixes into your flight plan, it just gives you the airway that all of those fixes are on. So if you were thinking of this like driving in your car down a highway, Q116 is going to be your highway, Vulcan is your on-ramp, JMAC is your off-ramp. From JMAC, we hop on Yankee 280, which is another airway out to Canvey, Yankee 297 to Ursus, UP406 to ACPEC, UQ121 to ISVAY. Oh, I think that's actually ISVAT. It looked like an I at first. It's ISVAT. And then we're going to join the ISVAT 4 Echo arrival into Bogota. So at the end of our flight plan, we see something similar to BB King 7. So in this case, it's a partial fix identifier with a number and a letter at the end of it. When you see something like that at the end of your flight plan, it's going to be a star, which is a standard terminal arrival route. We already have a video on what SIDS and stars are, how to read those charts, and how to fly them appropriately. So definitely go check out that video if this is the first time you're hearing about SIDS and stars, and it will explain everything about them. Now, some SIDS and stars are going to be the full fix identifier with a number. Others are going to be partial fix identifiers with a number and a letter that's at the end of them. Now, the reason that it drops that T off of ISVAT is because the SIDS and stars can't be formatted with more than 6 characters. So when you have SIDS or stars that are specific to a runway and they have that runway designator at the end, they just drop that last letter to make room for the actual formatting. Over here on the right-hand side, there are some suggested routes that you could pick from in the event that you were looking at this route right here, and for whatever reason you didn't like the way that it was formatted. There's a couple of different options you could choose from. I picked the one that Simbrief defaults it to most of the time, unless it's a route that really doesn't make sense to me. Next drop down we have is Route Finder. So again, I leave this at whatever Simbrief defaults it to. I don't stray too far from this really at all. Sometimes they may change the altitude if I don't like the altitude that Simbrief is going to give me, but for the most part, it's usually pretty good. Next, we have the alternate airports. So these are the criteria that it's going to search an alternate airport for. Again, if you wanted to change any of this criteria, you certainly could, but I just leave it at what Simbrief defaults it to. ETOP scenario. So this is how it's going to plan your ETOPS. If you are going to be using ETOPS, you could switch what your threshold time is. Again, you're not going to be able to see the drop down for this because the window capture is weird. So you have 60, 90, 120, and 180 minutes. I guess ETOPS 180 is a thing. I didn't even know that. You can pick whatever your plane is certified for. And then historical weather, you can choose whether or not that's enabled or disabled. Again, Simbrief defaults it disabled. That's just what I do. Not that big of a deal. And then the debug parameters, we have the winds aloft that are enabled. So when you're on VATSIM, you're supposed to be using live weather. So Simbrief defaults it to that. So I just leave it that way. It'll calculate based on what the weather is going to be. And then once we are satisfied with everything that is on this page, it's filled out to our liking. There's nothing else that we need to change. Right up here, you're going to see this blue generate flight button. We're going to click on that. And now Simbrief is going to generate a flight plan for us to fly any day. So what I'll do is I will read through all this information and break it down as we go through it. So we have our flight number and call sign are both going to be FedEx 43. Departure is going to be Memphis. Arrival is going to be Bogota. And the alternate is going to be, I don't know what airport that is. But for the purpose of this flight plan, we'll just leave it in there. This is not actually a flight that we're going to be doing, so I'm not too worried about it right now. But just make sure that your alternate is a suitable airport that can handle your plane. The aircraft is going to be the MD-11F, which is the MD-11 freighter. Departure date and time is going to be October 26th at 19:15 Zulu. That also has our arrival time, so it's estimating if we were to depart at 19:15 Zulu, we would arrive at our destination at 018 Zulu. Airtime is 4 hours and 23 minutes, so that's going to be our wheels up to wheels down time, and our block time is 5 hours and 3 minutes. As we said before, block time is going to be your air time plus your taxi out and taxi in time. Airframe is going to be the TFDI MD-11. Down below we have our flight plan summary. So our initial altitude is going to be 33,000 feet, which is flight level 330. Our cruise profile is going to be a cost index of 154, so that's what we're going to put into the FMS for the cost index. Route distance is 2,154 nautical miles. Average winds are going to be 267 degrees at 27 knots, so a little bit of a crosswind, nothing too crazy. Wind component, it says P012, so that is telling us that the winds are about 12 knots faster than what they usually are at this time of year. ISA deviation is P11, so that means that the ISA temperature, or ISA, if you want to say ISA, is 11 degrees warmer than it usually is. Release number is 1, so release number is just how many times we've generated this flight plan. Air rack cycle is 2410, so that is the most up-to-date air rack cycle at the time this video is recorded. OFP layout is LIDO, so that's how the flight plan itself is going to be formatted. Units are going to be in pounds because I still don't believe that the metric system is a real thing. Navlog is set to yes, meaning that's going to show us our navlog, and then ETOPS, it's set to no. So even though that we picked ETOPS planning for the plane, when Simbrief was doing its evaluation, it did not see anything that would qualify for any ETOPS planning. In this case, mainly being that the MD-11 is a 3-engine plane. Next, we have our load sheet. So our en route burn is 81,473 pounds. That's how much fuel it's going to take for us to get from Memphis to Bogota. Block fuel is 113,580 pounds. That's how much fuel we have to put on board the plane before we push back. So the block fuel is going to be your en route burn, your contingency fuel, and any reserve fuel that it is planned. Passenger count is going to be 0. Cargo is going to be 164,200 pounds. And then next, we have a couple of different weights. The weights that we're going to focus on here are the zero fuel weight, takeoff weight, and landing weight. So at the top, we have the estimated weights, and then at the bottom, we have our maximum weights. So we want to make sure that the numbers at the top are less than or equal to the numbers that are on the bottom. Estimated zero fuel weight is 421,199 pounds over the max of 451,299 pounds. Takeoff weight is 531,000 and some change over 625,000 and some change. I'm just too lazy to read that entire number. And our landing weight is 450,000 over 481,000. So all the weights look good. We're just going to make sure that when everything is loaded on the plane, that the center of gravity is where it needs to be. And if we need to shift some weight around, we can certainly do it. Just below, we have our route of flight. So it's added a couple of things to it. We're just going to go through here real quick. So we have takeoff from Memphis, right now planning on runway 36 left. The shaded out information, we have N0492 F330. That is going to be our cruising speed and cruising altitude. Your cruising speed is going to be your true airspeed. That is not your ground speed. That is not your indicated speed. For the love of God, do not try to fly 492 knots indicated on a friggin' MD-11. And then F330 is flight level 330, which is going to be our cruising altitude. We're going to fly the BB King 7 departure through the Kermi transition, then fly direct to Vulcan. So I'm going to stop right here. In between Kermi and Vulcan, we see DCT. DCT is an abbreviation for direct. It means that you are going to fly directly from one fix to another. We don't have any of them on this flight plan, but if you see 3-letter identifiers, they are going to be VORs, which you probably already know what these are prior to seeing this video. 3-letter identifiers are VORs, except for DCT. DCT is just an abbreviation for direct. If you try to put it into your FMS as a VOR, the plane is not going to accept it. That's not the plane being stupid. That is by design. DCT is not a VOR. It is an abbreviation for direct. From Vulcan, we have Q116 to Patoy, and then Q116 again to JMAC. Now, the reason it breaks it up like this is because we have a step climb planned at Patoy. Is that even how you say it? Patoy? I don't know. But at Patoy, our cruising speed is going to be 493 knots, and our cruising altitude is going to be flight level 350. So when you have step climbs planned into your flight plan, that's how it's going to be formatted. It's going to give you a new cruising speed, and it's going to give you a different altitude. So this is just telling us that our step climb is going to be at Patoy. Then from JMAC, Yankee 280 to Canvey, Yankee 297 to Ursus, UP 406 to Akbek, UQ 121 to Isvat, then fly the Isvat 4 Echo arrival into Bogota, right now planning runway 14 right. Next dropdown we have is the ATC flight plan. This is how it's going to be formatted to air traffic control when they look at it. We don't have to worry about that at all. Next thing we'll take a look at is the briefing preview. So there is a lot of information that is going to be on this. This is the actual OFP. In part 2 of this video, we're going to go through this in a little bit more detail and explain what all of this is. Right now, we're just going to look at the planned fuel section, is some information that we are going to need to take from this and put it into our flight plan. We have a couple of different fuel allotments here that adds up to our total block fuel. We have enough fuel to make the trip to Bogota, which is 81,473 pounds, or 4 hours and 23 minutes worth of fuel. An additional 15 minutes worth of contingency fuel, 4,635 pounds. Enough fuel for us to divert to our alternate airport just in case we need to, 9,273 pounds, which is 31 minutes worth of fuel. Then some additional fuel in reserves, again, just in case we need it, 7,052 pounds, which is 30 minutes worth of fuel. Then an additional 10% of reserve fuel. Usually you'll see that for international flying. So that's an additional 10%, which is 8,147 pounds, or 26 minutes worth of fuel. So again, just in case, throws a little extra on there in the event we have to get thrown in a holding pattern or if something goes wrong and we need a little extra fuel. That gives us our minimum takeoff fuel of 110,580 pounds, which is 6 hours and 6 minutes worth of fuel. So 6 hours and 6 minutes is what we're going to put in the fuel endurance section of our flight plan. The 110,580 pounds is going to be important for us. If we have anything less than that on the plane when we're getting ready to take off, we will not be in compliance with the other parameters set forth up above, and we would need to go back and refuel the plane. Then down here at the bottom, we have our taxi fuel, which is 3,000 pounds or 30 minutes worth of fuel, giving us our block fuel of 113,580 pounds. Then if we scroll down all the way to the bottom of the page, we're going to see pre-file on a network, file a flight plan on an online virtual flying network. We're going to hit the show details button, and then it gives us all the different networks that we can file this flight plan on. Since we're going to be filing on VATSIM, we're going to hit this pre-file button right here, and it's going to bring us to the VATSIM flight planning page. So right here, it brings in all the information from Simbrief. That way we don't have to fill it out manually. This is why I love filing flight plans through Simbrief. Makes life so much easier for you. So we'll just read through everything and make sure it is all good. Call sign is going to be FedEx 43. Flight rules are IFR. Aircraft is going to be the MD-11, and then I'm going to try and stand out of the way as best as I can here. Weight class category is going to be heavy. The equipment codes that we see over here, those all correspond to different pieces of equipment that are on the plane. Another great thing about Simbrief is that the developers have already put all of that information into the profile for their plane. We don't need to go through the equipment list and write down all of the corresponding letters and numbers that are associated with it. The developers have already taken care of that for us, drags it right in through Simbrief. Same thing right over here with the transponder code. That's all part of the Simbrief profile. We don't need to worry about it. Our departure field is going to be Memphis. The arrival is going to be Bogota. Off-block time is 19:15 Zulu. Again, everything is in Zulu time. Alternate is going to be SKCL, which I still don't know what airport that is, but we'll leave it in there for now. Altitude is 33,000 feet or flight level 330. So you're going to leave your initial altitude in there. You're not going to put your step climbs. That's why it's formatted in your route. En route time is 4 hours and 23 minutes. Cruising speed is 492 knots, and our fuel endurance is 6 hours and 6 minutes. If we scroll down a little bit further, we have our route details right here. So you can see in the route, it's got that step climb at Patoy in there. So when the controllers read through this route, they're going to see there's a step climb that is planned. Now, they may have you step climb at what you're planning for. They may not want you to do it until later on in your flight. So if ATC changes it on you, don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal. This lets them know that you are planning the step climb up to a higher altitude further on in the flight. The rest of the route looks good. Just want to make sure all the fixes and arrivals and departures and airways are in there, which it looks good to me. Scrolling on down as far as we can go, we have PBN, which is performance-based navigation. That ties directly to the equipment codes that are on the plane. That's going to let air traffic control know what the navigation capabilities of the plane are. Down below, we have the date of flight, October 26th. Again, make sure that is in Zulu time. Registration, that's where you could put the registration number of your plane. Again, this is just TFDI MD-11. We're going to leave it as is. Operator is FedEx. Performance category is D. That's important for the approach. And then as I keep walking back and forth here, because I keep getting in the way, we have EET, which is elapsed time. Those are the different amounts of times that we're going to be in those different center controllers' airspaces. Not really too important for us to worry about. Then the remarks section, it says TCAS Simbrief. I usually just delete that out because I don't really know why it puts it in there. That is where you can put any information that you want the air traffic controllers to know. So if you you are somebody that's new to VATSIM, you can put new pilot, first flight on VATSIM, first flight in the United States, first time in Colombia. If you have scenery issues with your airport, maybe one of your runways is missing or it's not as long as it's supposed to be because just the scenery for the airport is outdated. Stuff like that you can throw into the remarks section so air traffic control will know if you're going to need a little bit of extra help with something along your flight. This doesn't mean that you can put a whole paragraph in there as to why your life sucks. Just keep it brief. Let them know the most important things that you may need help with, because the longer you make this remarks section, the less likely they are to read through all of it. Voice rules, which if we hit this drop down, again, it's not going to show the drop down for some reason, but you have voice communications or text communications. So if you didn't want to communicate via voice, you can do it through text, through your pilot client. This just lets them know whether or not you can receive voice. That's going to wrap up part 1 of this video. In part 2, we're going to go through the OFP in a little bit more detail and break down some more things that are going to be on there that can help you throughout the course of your flight. But this will be a great point for you to start. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments section below. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. And until next time, this is Cross Hyperu, signing out.